Good morning. Welcome to The Human Author. My name is Jen Cantwell, and today I'm working on my epic fantasy series, Light Chaser. It's the fifth book in the series, and it's called The Warning. A couple of things. I wanted to just remind you that you can always come for the first 10 minutes of the broadcast to listen to the work that I did before, the day before. Also, if you have any questions or comments, please send them to Jen, Jen, at thehumanauthor.com. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and read what I wrote yesterday. They slept in the grass for several hours, but I found I was tired. Kenneth had made me promise to get him up, but he was sleeping so peacefully that I decided to let him sleep. It was Brennen who awoke first. "What happened?" he asked, sitting up and rubbing his eyes. "I thought you were going to get us up." The sun was high overhead, and I pointed up at the sky. "We're not short on time," I said. I know I told him I'd get him up, but we have all day. "Have you seen any other lawmen?" he asked nervously. "No," I said. "The ones that passed us by haven't returned." I wondered if this meant they'd killed. I doubted that Kenneth's people in the woods would have been able to defend themselves very well, much less able to take them down. Lawmen were hunters, and they were good at it. Brennen crawled over to where Kenneth was lying, grabbing his arm and shaking it. "What are you doing?" I asked. "He needs sleep, and anyway, he'll just be mad that I let him sleep for so long." But Brennen seemed determined. A moment later, Kenneth opened his eyes. Immediately, he sat up, an angry look on his face. "Bree, I told you you'd be safe, and you trusted me. You promised." This was true, but I didn't care. "The last thing I need is to have somebody weak following me." I pointed to the small pile of salad greens that Kenneth had yet to touch. "You should eat." "And you should sleep," he said, studying the greens. He brought them to his nose and sniffed. "Eat it," I said. "It's good." At this, Brennen laughed. "No, it's not, but it will keep us alive." Kenneth went ahead and took a bite, then grimaced. "Oh, bitter." Brennen shrugged. "It's all we have, and there's plenty of it. This isn't like last time." He looked at me. "There wasn't much for me to take last time, but on this route there's plenty." Kenneth looked at me and held out a fistful of greens. I was hungry enough to take them, but he hadn't eaten more than a bite. "You eat," I said, and he grimaced, which made both of us laugh. Unfortunately, Brennen took offense, and the brief moment of levity we'd shared evaporated. "I'm sorry, kiddo," I said. "We owe you respect. Thanks for the food." Brennen sat down between us and looked at his own pile of salad, then wrinkled his nose. "It's okay," he said. "It's not the best." "We just need a fat rabbit or two to go along with it," Kenneth said, smiling at him for the first time. I looked back and forth between them. Then Kenneth caught my eye. "What?" he asked defensively, and I knew the fun was over. Then, "Your turn to sleep, but no promises. You broke yours, so I'm not offering." I sat lying down in the grass. I didn't answer him, just looked up at the sun, shielding my eyes. "We have hours. Just sleep." But I couldn't sleep. I lay there for at least 30 minutes, watching little bugs crawl up blades of grass. But sleep didn't come, even when I closed my eyes. I knew that just laying there would allow my body to rest. But instead of resting, I found my mind filling with terrible things. This time, I wasn't dreaming about anything. I was imagining what would happen if we were to fail, if I fail. "No, you won't fail. You can't." It was true. It seemed like years since I'd first met a keeper, the tortoise. He had served as beacon for the wildlands, a sort of gatekeeper, and even though he'd had nothing but bad news for me, there was part of me that longed to see him again. But then the inevitable doubt crept in. What if he had news for me again? What if it was worse than the first time? These thoughts tumbled around in my brain, and coupled with the hunger to think clearly. So instead of sleeping, I just tossed around, trying to keep nightmares at bay. After a couple hours, the skin on my arms itching from brushing up against the grass, I sat up. Did you sleep at all? Kenneth asked. I shook my head. Not really, but I rested. That will have to be enough. The sun was starting to sink down in the sky, and Kenneth peeked over the blades of grass, searching for our pursuers. I haven't seen them, he said. Maybe they went in a different direction. They know where we're headed. I wondered about Zahn, about what he knew. The only thing I knew about Zahn was that he hated me and that he had hated my mother before me. My mother had had strong magic, but apparently not as strong as my own. I supposed that one couldn't tell how much power she might have through a family bloodline. I wondered how many of the children in the garbage patch had their own magic. It probably wasn't too many. Otherwise, wouldn't they find something better to eat? Maybe they're just hiding. I thought of the children back in the forest. Iona had been the leader of that group, but then all of them had disappeared right from under our noses. Only Iona had returned, and the news she brought had been terrifying. If only Torin would stop setting his sights on children, we might have a fighting chance. Briefly, I wondered if it was how he saw me, too. Was I still seen as a child? Did that make the danger I was in more serious? I looked around at my friends, suddenly worried for them. For even though they understood they were in danger, that maybe they didn't realize how much. I might be able to protect them, but even my powers had limitations. I could set a protective shield that covered all three of us, and I supposed that was the spell I would have to focus on. Finally, as the moon began to rise and the first of the stars came out, we stood and began walking away from the little camp we'd made. Kenneth and I took turns watching the land behind us in case we were being followed. I led first, scanning the path ahead. We were getting closer and closer to the tortoise keeper. I wondered if he had any light left at all, or any counsel. After a couple of hours, I was certain we were only minutes away from finally reaching him. Could he sense us coming? Surely he could. As we approached, I called out to him, "Great tortoise, are you there?" There was no answer, but I did get shushed angrily by Kenneth. "I don't care how close we are to that thing," he said. "You yelling out into the night is not wise." But I couldn't help it. I was desperate for him, even though I'd promised myself I would stay away from light. We were all starving, and I knew that even a sip of the stuff could save us. I stopped yelling and started running. Kenneth could hardly argue with this, and though I was far ahead of them, they followed. Finally, I made it to the great tortoise's head. If I'd been tall enough, I might have hugged him, but no one was as tall as a keeper, not even the giants. "Keeper," I said, "what news do you have for Bree of Eagleview?" It was then that I noted, even in the darkness, that he wasn't moving. This was unusual, for though he'd been close to death the last time I'd seen him, he'd still had a small bit of light in his pool. Now the pool was empty, and he was silent. Confused, I cautiously approached, walking slowly now. But when I got close enough to look him in the eye, I realized the truth. All around us were gigantic boulders, the stones that remained of a keeper when all of their light had been taken. I remembered how boulders had fallen from his shell the last time we met. He'd been close to death then, and we had taken his light. "Oh, tortoise," I said, tears coming to my eyes. "Who would counsel me now?" Kenneth and Brennen finally caught up, and they both stood beside me, panting. "So this is him?" Kenneth asked. "I thought they were supposed to talk to you." I turned to him, my tears falling to my cheeks. "He was supposed to talk to me," I said. "I'd been counting on it." "But what did he tell you last time?" "That I'd be the one to kill Tor." I began walking around the tortoise, one hand following the stones on his shell, wishing that I had enough power to bring him back to life. But the keepers were life, the ones responsible for the most powerful magic in our lands. Now what? "And you believed him?" Kenneth asked. Brennen shook his arm. "What she's saying is the truth," he said. "I met the others. They all said the same thing, that Bree would be the one. I never had a choice, I said. When I was told by him and was after me, I didn't believe it at first. But then they started chasing me. They? Well, it seemed like everyone. We had the trackers first. Then, in the Shadow Mountains, we came across Torin's own son. I still didn't understand why they didn't kill me when they had the chance. Maybe they can't kill you, Brennen said hopefully. Maybe that's why he's after you. I hadn't thought of this before, but maybe he was right. If so, it meant that my power was far greater than even I had imagined. A fool with the most evil wizard anyone had ever known. If the others couldn't do the job, could I? I placed my forehead against the tortoise's shell, wishing for him to come back to us. But even my healing powers wouldn't have been enough to bring him back. I turned to the others. We'll have to find another keeper, I said, and this time I didn't have light on my mind. I thought we were headed home, Kenneth said. We were, but the only beings that can tell me where I stand in the fight against Torin are the keepers or the fiends. I knew that it would take days for us to make it to the Ram Keeper, and he hadn't been very helpful at all, at least not to me. He'd both injured and saved my father. He'd insisted that we commit to fighting the war against Torin. I hadn't forgotten the pain my father had endured, and even though I knew the ram had a large pool of light, I had no desire to see him again. Because what if we did go to him? Then what? We would find ourselves many days away from home, and then there was the issue of meeting up with lifters. It could be that the ram's pool had run dry too. Suddenly, I had an idea. It was madness, I knew, but maybe if we were able to find a fiend, we would get the information we needed and probably all of the light we could handle. But who? Which fiend? And then I thought of it. The hawk. He had nearly killed my father and had taken me for a flight as well. I looked to the sky, wondering if he would make an appearance. I also took note that we hadn't come across any wicks. Torin's lookouts hadn't shown themselves at all during my journey from Zamira to here. Where were they? Where were they indeed? All right. Just a moment. I lost my place. There we go. I thought about whether or not I should tell them, comma, period. It was a crazy idea, comma, total madness, comma, but it could work, period. At least it would be predictable, semicolon. The capkeeper hawk was dangerous, comma, and he had nearly pecked my father's eyes out. I looked at Brennen and Kenneth, comma, trying to imagine putting them into danger, period. I had already done enough dangerous things, comma, and if I was going to find out the news about Torin's campaign against me, comma, I was going to do it alone, period. New line. The sun was beginning to rise over the horizon, comma, and I turned to them, period. Open quote. We should find somewhere to sleep, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. There are caves to the north, period. Close quote. New line. I pointed in that direction, comma, and noted that several hills Well, period. Those hills had caves, comma, I knew, comma, and my father and I had hidden there more than once, period. Line. Maybe you'll get lucky and find a fiend in one of the caves, period. That would be easier, period. New line. Maybe, period. But at least with the hawk, I knew what I was getting into, period. New line, open quote. All right, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. This cap keeper is gone, comma, period. I suggest we make our way home, period, close quote, new line. Brennen sighed, frustrated, comma, but Kenneth didn't say a word, period. Sighed. Line, open quote. How far are they? Question mark, close quote. Brennen asked, comma, period. His early childhood had been marked by the vicious leaders of the cap lifters, period. They were a crew of thieves who preyed upon cap-light cap chasers, period. My father and I had come upon a group of them on our way through the cap wild caplands, period. That's how we'd met the children, period. After breaking them out of their forced involvement, comma, we'd had to deal with trackers, period. They had been sent by Torin, comma, but we had been faster than they were, period. It was only when we'd rested for too long that they caught up with us, period. That new line. I thought about the battle that had ensued, comma, the way we'd lost Malcolm, comma, and almost Regan, comma, as well, period. In the end, comma, it was a bloody arrow that had taken their leader, comma, Donovan, comma, down, period. New line. It was a risk we were taking, comma, going along the same route my father and I had taken back then, period. Months before, period. But soon we would arrive at a cave where we could hide and get our bearings, period. New line, open quote. I think we should go, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. We did away with most of the cap lifters, comma, close quote, period, close quote. I put my hand on Brennen's shoulder, comma, but he just shrugged it off, period. New line. I don't think so, comma, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. They were ... scrappy, period. I know they're still out there, comma, even if Donovan is gone, period. Close quote, new line. Open quote. This time, you'll have me to protect you, comma, close quote. Kenneth said, comma, raising his club, period. New line. This was enough to make Brennen laugh, period. Comma. But there was no joy in it, period. Open quote. You don't know them, comma, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. Have cap light, comma, themselves, period. There's no beating them, comma, at least not without magic, period, close quote, new line. I stood up tall, comma, ready to convince them, comma, but then I realized it would be impossible, period. New line. Comma. And for the first time, I considered that I might need to make this journey alone, period. New line. You've left so many behind, period. You can't do it again, period. New line. But I knew that I must, period. I didn't want to put anyone else in danger if I could help it, period. New line, open quote. Let's go, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. He's long gone, comma, now, period, close quote. I looked up at the enormous cap keeper, period. I wondered who'd taken the last of his light, period. New line. I was determined to find more, comma, just enough to keep us alive, period. New line. It was always such an effort to do even that, period. New line. I began undo. I turned away from the tortoise and began walking away from him. North, period. Part of me hoped that they would argue, comma, that they wouldn't be willing to follow me more, period. But when I heard the sound of their footsteps in the grass, comma, I knew I would have to desert them in some other way, period. New line. Kenneth caught up with me, period. Open quote. So, comma, where are we going? Question mark. Close quote. New line. Open quote. We can find a cave to sleep in, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. There are several along the journey, period. My father and I never had much trouble hiding. Period. Close quote. New line. Of course, comma. This was somewhat of a lie. Period. Mostly, comma, the caves had safe, comma. But several arguments ensued between my father and me, comma. And once we'd been trapped by a fiend. Period. New line. I didn't know what awaited us now, comma. But I hoped we would make it all the way north. I had to leave them behind. Period. New line. Page break. Period. After walking for a couple of hours, the morning, comma, we came across undo. We came upon the beginning of the hills. Period. These were enormous rocks carved by some river millennia ago. Period. Now, comma, there was no water except that which I could pull from the earth. New line. Open quote. There, comma, close quote, I said as we got closer. Period. Open quote. We can hide in one of the caves up there. Period. Then we can look out upon the valley for any pursuers. Period. Close quote. New line. Nobody argued, comma, and I realized that starvation was probably the reason. Period. We had to reserve our strength, comma, for none of us knew what awaited us, comma. Even if we made it to a seemingly safe cave. Whoops. A seemingly safe cave, period. New line. I made my way up the hill, comma. Kenneth and Brennen, silent but for their panting, period. New line. Finally, comma. At the top, we found 2 caves that would work, period. I chose the smaller and led the way inside, period. New line. Then, comma, when I should have felt safer, comma, memories of my time with Colm came into my mind, period. We had hidden in caves together, comma, at least before I had killed him, period. New line. My stomach tightened involuntarily, comma, and I felt a pain in my chest, period. I hoped I would be able to get over this crime I'd committed, comma, or at least to get away with it, period. New line. You don't want to carry it with you, period. New line. It was true, comma. So I abandoned my thought of Colm and turned to welcome Kenneth and Brennen into our new hiding place, period. New line. Both of them sat down heavily upon the stone, comma. Kenneth leaning all the way back, comma, breathing hard, period. Finally, comma, after minutes, comma, he rolled over and pushed himself up to sitting, period. New line, open quote. How long is it going to be until we get closer? Undo. We get there, question mark, close quote. He looked at Brennen, period. Open quote. I don't know how long this one will last, period, close quote. Brennen laughed, comma, then pulled a thick handful of salad greens from inside his tunic, period. He handed them over to Kenneth, period. New line, open quote. I think I have a better chance than you do, comma, close quote, he said, comma. Stuffing a big handful into his mouth, period. New line, open quote. I'll take some of that, comma, close quote, I said, period. New line. I held out my hand, period. He looked down at what he had in his hands, comma, and I got the impression he was holding the last of the food, period. New line, open quote. Never mind, comma, close quote, I said, period, open quote. We'll find something else to eat, period. Don't worry, period, close quote. New line. He looked at me guiltily, comma, but then his hunger won out. Comma. And he stuffed the greens into his mouth, period. New line. It was okay with me, comma. The fact that they'd taken the last of the food, period. I was trying hard to not think about our lack of cap light, comma. But the idea that the hawk might be hovering over his own store, comma, made my mouth water, period. New line. It will be different than before, period. You'll share it this time, period. New line. I sat down on the stone and put my hands O- Over it, comma, slowly pulling water from the earth, period. Stone was always more difficult, comma, but it yielded fresh water, comma, and dirt did, period. It was nice to have a drink without sucking mud, period. New line. After I'd had my fill, comma, I sat back and indicated that Brennen should go next, period. New line. He looked warily between us, comma, then pointed to his mouth, period. Open quote. He should go, period. Close quote. Full of greens. I'll go when I'm done, period. Close quote. New line. I looked up at Kenneth, comma, but he just shrugged his shoulders and leaned over for his own drink, period. New line. Once Brennen was done eating, comma, he did the same, comma, then rolled over and lay his head on the stone, period. New line, open quote. Here, comma, close quote, I said, comma, reaching for my bag, period. Open quote. Take this, period, close quote. New line. I almost handed it over to him when I realized it was a lump sticking out awkwardly, period. I hadn't told them about the book, comma. But I removed it from the pack now and opened it, period. There it was, comma, my name, just as before, period. And nothing else, period. New line, open quote. What's that? Question mark. Close quote. Kenneth said, period. Asked, period. New line. I opened it to the one page written upon, comma, and held it up for him to see, period. New line, open quote. You wondered how I knew the tortoise was telling the truth, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. This was how, period. Close quote. I handed him the book, period. Undo. Comma. And he began to write through the pages, period. New line, open quote. Why is your name here? Question mark, close quote. New line, open quote. It's sort of a list, comma, close quote, I said, period. I knew Brennen was listening, even though his eyes were closing, period. Open quote. It's a list of M- of people intended to fight Torin, period, close quote. New line. I wondered if Brennen was asleep yet, comma, but I wasn't about to take the risk, of telling the truth, period. I was marked by this book, comma, by this prophecy, comma, and there was no way to get around the blood red scrawl of my name, period. New line. Open quote. I don't see a list, comma, close, he said, period. Open quote. Where are all the others? Question mark, close quote. New line. I shook my head, comma, then pointed to Brennen, period. Open quote. Later, comma, close quote, I whispered, period. Open quote. We should sleep while we can, period. We're lucky nobody saw us on our way here, period, close quote. It had been broad daylight, comma, and I was heartened by the fact no one had found us yet, period. New line. I went ahead and laid down, comma, myself, comma, sharing the makeshift pillow I'd created with my pack, period. With Brennen, period. His breathing was slow and even, comma, but I knew this kid had lived long enough, comma, scared enough, comma, to know how to feign sleep, period. New line. That was okay, period. I didn't want any more trauma affecting him, period. At least, comma, not if I could help it, period. New line. Kenneth stayed sitting up, comma, automatically taking the first watch, comma. But now that we were safe and shaded, I closed my eyes, period. New line. But it was as before, period. I rolled over again and again over the space of hours, comma. But no sleep came, period. Finally, comma, when I opened my eyes again, comma, I found Kenneth sitting at the opening. Undo. I found Kenneth sitting at the mouth of the cave, comma, looking out for any enemies who might have been able to track us, period. New line. Slowly, comma, I pushed myself up and padded over to him, comma, sitting down next to him, period. New line. He looked up, period. New line, open quote. You know, comma, I used to have a thing for you, comma, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. That day when Zahn chased you away from Eagleview, comma, it was difficult for me not to follow, period. Close quote, new line. I frowned at this statement, comma, undo. I frowned at this statement, semicolon, comma, surprised by his words, period. New line, open quote. A thing, question mark, close quote. New line. He smiled sheepishly, then looked away, period. Open quote. Yeah, period. I guess all those times I asked you for kisses, I really meant it, period. Close quote. New line. You were so intimidating, comma, though, period. Close quote. New line. I chuckled, comma, despite the nerves, undo. The fact that I had suddenly become nervous, period. The idea that anyone could have interest in me, comma, just a dirty girl, undo. Just some girl, dirty market that surrounded Eagleview, comma, was unthinkable, period. It made me think of Connell, period. If I were to tell Kenneth the things Connell knew about me, would he act in the same way? Question mark. Somehow, comma, I felt that he would, period. New line. Connell wasn't fair, period. New line. This was true, period. My ability to possess another hadn't been something I'd desired, period. Semicolon. It was just something that happened, period. One day, comma, in the midst of battle, comma, I found I was able to gain access into the heads of others, period. Now, comma, I wished I had kept it a secret from everyone, comma, especially Connell, period. New line. For a moment, comma, I thought about telling Kenneth the truth, period. It would have been better than him finding out later and accusing me of lying, period. New line. He wouldn't, period. New line. I thought this to myself, comma, but I didn't know if it was true, period. Sure, comma, I had run with Kenneth on my way growing up. Undo. Since I had been a kid, period. It was after he grew taller than me that I deserted our friendship, period. I remembered how he would corner me, comma, begging for a kiss, period. But Most every time I denied it, comma, using my power instead to toss him away from me, period. New line. It had always worked, period. New line. Open quote. Anyway, comma, my dad would have never allowed it, comma, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. Luckily for me, comma, he didn't pay much attention to what I did with my time, period. Only at night, when I was expected to keep watch, would he pay me any notice, period, close quote. New line. Open quote. So that was all you did? Question mark, close quote, I asked, period. Open quote. I guess I thought M dash, close quote, close quote. Open quote. I had a happy home life? Question mark. That maybe they'd decided to send me to school? Question mark. Close quote. He laughed quietly, period. Open quote. Most nights I was lucky to get away without a punch in the face, period. I think it was because I'm the oldest in our family, comma, and he expected me to teach my brothers how to behave, period. Well, comma, was I supposed to do that? Question mark. Close quote. New line. Open quote. You're not totally alone, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. Sometimes things like that would happen to me, comma, too, period. Close quote. New line. He shrugged, period. Undo. I'm surprised to hear that you want to go home at all, period, close quote. New line. He shrugged, period. Open quote. Really, comma. I'm just following you, period. We don't know what to do, period. Seeing you was the first time I had the feeling that we might survive, period. The lawman's searches have been dangerously close to finding us and our little camp, period. We've had to hide and move frequently, period. Close quote. New line. I was glad the conversation had taken a turn away from the revelation that Kenneth had actually cared about me, period. New line. Open quote. Well, comma, close quote, I said, period, open quote. I hope you don't regret it in the end, period. We are probably headed into quite a battle, if we want to free the people Zahn has imprisoned, period. Close quote. New line. He chuckled, period. Open quote. We'll need to avoid my father, period. He'd be the first one to turn us in, period. Close quote. New line. Open quote. He must really hate you, period. Close quote. New line. Open quote. I don't know about that, comma, close quote, he said, period. Open quote. But I think he simply doesn't care, period. He's concerned with money, comma, always has been, comma. And my in the family has been tied to that concern, period. Now, comma, with the bounties Zahn puts on people's heads, comma, my father, undo. It's something that has interested my father far more than running the fruit stand, period. Close quote. New line. Open quote. The fruit stand, question mark, close quote, came Brennen's voice, period. Open quote. Can we go there? Question mark, close quote, new line. It made me feel terrible, comma, knowing how sick with hunger he was, period. New line, open quote. We're going to find something even better, comma, close quote, I said, period. Open quote. I know that somewhere between here and Eagleview, we will meet a cap keeper, period. The cap light they guard is enough to fill any belly, period. Close quote, new line. This was the first time I'd considered using cap light in a way other than to get drunk on it, period. Our energy was fading fast, comma, and I knew undo. Period. All of us had been without food. Enough. For quite some time, comma, I felt certain, period. New line. Open quote. You should get some sleep, comma, close quote. I said to Kenneth, period. Open quote. And you should go back to sleep, comma, close quote. I said to Brennen, period. Brennen. Period. New line. He yawned loudly, comma, stretching his arms above his head, period. Open quote. But I'm not tired anymore, period. Close quote, new line. Well, comma, he is, comma, close quote. Open quote. I said, period. Open quote. You should at least lay down, period, close quote. Comma, pointing at Kenneth. I knew that the only way I could get away would be to abandon them in their sleep, period. My plan would be more difficult with Brennen awake again, but I would find a way, period. As determined as I was to use the cap light in the way it was intended, I knew there would be an inherent danger, not from the hawk, but from me, period. Close quote. Oops. All right. That's what I've got for today. We hit almost 2,500 words, which is like completely insane. But it's going very well. I'm happy with what I've been reading and editing. So this has been very productive for me. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you again tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock Pacific.